They left me in that nursing home like I was yesterday's garbage. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't finished yet. Before you hear the full story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I want to know where all my sisters are tuning in from. Now, let me take you back to the day everything changed. The moment they took me away, the sky was as gray as it gets. The kind of gray that presses down on you like bad news before it even hits. I should have known something was off. Karen called me that morning, sweet as sugar, saying she was coming over with David and Luke to help me get some things in order. Help. I should have known better. I sat at the kitchen table, the very same table where I braided their hair, helped with math homework, and served birthday cake. I'd even set out 4 cups of coffee, like we were having some kind of family meeting. How silly of me. I wore my pink sweater, the one George always said brought out the color in my cheeks. I remember adjusting my lipstick in the toaster's reflection. Isn't that funny? I still wanted to look nice for my children. I wanted them to love me, to see me as their mother. The door slammed harder than it needed to. Karen walked in first, all brisk and businesslike, with that tight look she always got when she was lying. David followed, staring at his phone, not even bothering to look up. Luke came in last, holding a stack of papers. I didn't like the look of them. Mom, Karen began, her voice soft and patronizing, the way she always spoke when she was about to tear my world apart. We've been talking. I could already feel my stomach tightening. It was that beginning, the one I dreaded. She said they found a wonderful place for me, a resort-style living facility in the hill country. It sounded like one of those spa commercials. I blinked, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. I'm not going anywhere, I said calmly. This is my home. Luke cleared his throat and slid the papers across the table. Mom, you've been forgetting things. We're just trying to protect you. Protect me from what? My own life. I wanted to scream, to throw those papers back in their faces, but I didn't. I just stared at my hands that had packed their lunches, sewn their Halloween costumes, held them during fevers and nightmares. Hands that had worked 2 jobs after George died to keep a roof over their heads. You already signed the power of attorney papers, Karen said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. That's when my knees buckled. I didn't remember signing anything, but I'd been tired. Sometimes the days blurred together and I'd misplace things. Nothing dangerous, just little slips here and there. I trusted them. They were my babies. I never thought they'd use it against me. Within an hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me pick out which photo frames to bring. Just one suitcase. My house. My home, filled with memories of love, sweat, and heartache. They took it all from me in the span of an afternoon. The ride to the nursing home was eerily quiet. David drove. Karen sat beside him, tapping away on her phone. Luke stayed with me in the back, but not once did he look me in the eye. Mom, you'll love it there. They have bingo nights and movie screenings, he muttered. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to slap him, but I didn't either. We pulled into a beige complex tucked between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees, no garden, just pavement and bland walls. A woman in scrubs stepped out with a clipboard. And that was it. Just like that, my life had been reduced to a beige box. She smiled too hard. That first night, I cried like a child. I buried my face in the pillow to muffle the sobs. I wasn't crying because of the cold sheets, the tasteless food, or the sterile room. No, I cried because they had stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was no longer a mother, a woman with memories and dreams. I had become just an obstacle, a burden to be moved from one place to the next. But let me tell you something. I don't stay down for long. It took a few weeks for the anger to fade. I stayed quiet, watching, observing. I saw the staff, kind but overworked. I noticed the other residents, lost souls wrapped in cardigans, sitting silently in the waiting room of life. But there was one exception. I saw Ruth. She was in the common area, playing poker with a nurse, laughing like an outlaw in an old Western film. You bet your lunch money on that hand, baby, she shouted, slapping her cards onto the table. I couldn't help but smile, the first real smile in weeks. She noticed. You knew, she asked, tilting her head. You've got that freshly betrayed by family look. I laughed, actually laughed. And just like that, Ruth pulled me into her world. Then came Di, sweet as pie but sharp as a whip. She used to be a school librarian in Vermont. She noticed everything, and she could see right through people. And then there was Maxine, tough as nails, tall with eyes that seemed to have seen it all. She used to teach law at a community college before a fall messed up her hip. We started sitting together at meals, playing games, and later, late into the night, sipping tea in the lounge, telling stories. One night, as we sat there, I told them about my story, about the betrayal, about my house. Maxine leaned back, raising an eyebrow. Did you sign over the deed? She asked. I shook my head. No, I think I still own it. Legally. Ruth let out a low whistle. Honey, if that's true, you've got gold under your feet and fire in your hands. That's when it began, the flicker of an idea, the spark of rebellion in a place built on surrender. I wasn't going to sit there and let myself rot away. If they thought they had thrown me away, they were about to learn exactly who they were messing with. I was Ella Laner Grace Miller, mother, widow, survivor, and I was about to set the world on fire. It started with a drawer in Oak Hills. Senior living was small, just enough room for a twin bed, a dresser, and a narrow closet that smelled faintly of antiseptic and peppermint gum. I unpacked my single suitcase with a numbness, like I was moving through the motions. Then, I opened the last drawer and found it tucked away in the corner. My old leather folio. The one I used to keep important papers in. My fingers trembled as I unzipped it. Inside was the original deed to my house. Still in my name, still legal. No signature from Karen. No stamp from a notary. It was mine, just mine. I sat down hard on the bed, the papers shaking in my lap. A flood of emotions came rushing back. Shame, heartbreak, rage. My children had planned to sell my house. They didn't do it out of love or concern for me. They wanted my home for themselves, probably to fix it up and sell it to some young couple for a profit. I clutched that deed like it was the last piece of me they hadn't stolen. And for the first time since George's funeral, I prayed, not for strength or peace, but for clarity. I needed a sign, and it came the very next morning. Ruth stormed into the dining hall, wearing her lavender sweater with rhinestone buttons. Guess who's back from her son's wedding, she said. Maxine. And she's got stories. That was how Maxine rejoined our little circle. She'd been gone for a week to attend her youngest son's wedding in Austin. And from the way she rolled her eyes while pouring her black coffee, it was clear that the wedding hadn't gone well. The new wife's a Botox doll, Maxine muttered. Wouldn't know a book if it hit her in the lip fillers. We all laughed, but I was distracted. I waited until breakfast was over, and the nurses had shifted their focus to the resident who was determined to flush magazines down the toilet. That's when I pulled Maxine aside. I need your help, I whispered urgently. Later that afternoon, in the privacy of Maxine's room, we spread out the documents across her desk. She studied the deed, the copy of my will, and the medical power of attorney, which I now vaguely remembered signing after a nasty fall the previous year, right after Karen came over with Chinese food and some urgent forms to sign. You didn't sign over the title, Maxine confirmed, tapping her red nails on the page. They have control over your medical decisions. Sure, but the house is still yours. My heart skipped a beat. Can they still sell it if they try and I catch it in time? No, she replied. But if they forge your signature, her voice trailed off. I gritted my teeth. Then I need to sell it first. She stared at me like I'd just sprouted wings. Are you serious? I want to sell my house, I said, feeling the weight of my words. Take that money and get out of here. I want to live before I die, Maxine. And then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. It took a few days to iron out the details. Ruth, ever the resourceful one, claimed she once dated a real estate agent and still had his number, though she swore he was probably bald and divorced by now. Di helped us navigate the facility's phone rules and even set up a Gmail account on the community center's public computer. Maxine made the real calls, the legal ones, the financial ones. And with each passing day, I felt like I was waking up from a long, drugged dream. Every time I walked past the nurse's station, I smiled. Every time Karen called to check in with her fake sweet voice, I played the part of the docile mother, grateful and declining visitors. But truthfully, I was preparing my exit. The sale went quickly. Turns out my neighborhood was a hot spot for tech workers and young families. The buyer offered full asking price within hours of the listing. I didn't even have to meet them. The transaction went through Maxine's old law contact, Jack Winston, a grumpy yet brilliant old man who still owed her a favor from a past case. The money was wired to a new account in my name, which Di had helped me set up online using the facility's public Wi-Fi. It wasn't hard. No one suspects little old ladies of plotting revolutions. But the final step was the hardest. I had to disappear before they realized what I'd done. We picked a Friday night. Most of the staff would be distracted with bingo night in the rec room, and Ruth had bribed one of the younger aides with a bottle of perfume and a pizza to skip her rounds on my room. I packed one small suitcase, grabbed my passport, printed itinerary, and 3 one-way plane tickets. I left a note on my pillow, "Don't look for me. I've gone to find the life you stole from me, Eleanor." We rode in silence to the airport. The 3 of us squeezed into an Uber with broken air conditioning and a driver who didn't ask any questions. The terminal lights felt like heaven. I had to bite my lip to stop myself from crying. Rome. That was our first stop. A place I'd only seen in movies, dreamed about in silence. Now it was real. As the plane lifted off, I looked out the window, watching the Texas lights sparkle below like the tears I refused to shed. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how long we would last or how far we would go. But I knew one thing for sure. They took everything from me. Now, I had nothing left to lose. And that made me the most dangerous woman in the world. Rome smelled like fresh bread, old stone, and something sweet I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was freedom. Maybe it was joy. Maybe it was revenge. It was my first time on a plane in over 20 years. My legs cramped, my back ached, and I hadn't slept a wink. But I couldn't stop smiling. Ruth snored softly beside me the entire flight, her head bobbing like a pigeon in a gentle breeze. Doy, ever the cautious one, held my hand during takeoff, whispering every prayer she knew in both English and some half-remembered Latin. Maxine, on the other hand, was far more composed. She read a paperback thriller and sipped tomato juice as if we were on a leisurely cruise, not fugitives on a mission of redemption. We landed in the soft, golden light of morning, the eternal city sprawling below us like a dream you never want to wake from. The cobblestone streets, flower boxes hanging from windows, and the sight of a man playing violin by a fountain made me want to weep. This was it. This was freedom. We checked into a quaint pension in Trastevere. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, warm bread in the mornings, and a view of ivy-draped buildings that made you believe in poetry again. The clerk barely blinked when 4 American women with gray hair and suspiciously few suitcases walked in. Rome, I suppose, had seen stranger things. That first day, we walked until our feet ached. Ruth haggled with a street vendor over scarves we didn't need. Doy bought postcards and wrote one to her high school sweetheart who'd passed away 15 years ago. Maxine flirted with a cafe owner named Luca, who brought us tiramisu on the house. And me, I stood in front of the Colosseum, letting the wind wash over my face. I was no one's burden. I wasn't some discarded mother. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, alive. But freedom, as it turns out, has a funny way of stirring up the ghosts. On our 3rd night, I opened my email. I shouldn't have, but curiosity can be a wicked thing. There were 10 messages from Karen. The subject line of the most recent one read, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already hear her voice in my head, shocked, panicked, furious. The house was gone. The money was gone. So was I. Maxine found me out on the terrace, my laptop on my lap, a glass of wine untouched beside me. She sat down next to me, her knee brushing mine. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I don't feel bad," I whispered, surprised by my own words. I thought I'd feel guilty. Maxine lit a cigarette, even though she wasn't supposed to. "They had a choice, Ellie. They chose themselves. You just chose you back." The next day, we took a train to Florence. I'd always wanted to see the Duomo. Standing inside that cathedral, beneath a dome painted with heaven and hell, I thought about George, about the promises we made. I had told him I'd take care of the kids, no matter what. I never imagined I'd need to protect myself from them. That night, I found the letters. We were staying in a tiny rental, the wallpaper peeling and the bed creaking with every movement. As I unpacked my suitcase to find a lost sock, I noticed the folder. It had been tucked into a side pocket I rarely used. A manila folder with George's handwriting on it. There were 6 letters, each one addressed to me and dated over a span of 5 years before he died. I read them in silence, sitting on the edge of the bed while the city hummed outside. In those letters, George wrote about the kids, how he'd noticed their entitlement, their manipulation, how he worried about how they treated me when he wasn't around. He mentioned conversations with Luke that sent chills down his spine, comments suggesting it might be time for Mom to move out, even when I was perfectly healthy. He'd seen the writing on the wall and hadn't known how to stop it. Then came the last letter, written just weeks before his heart gave out. Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope to God I was wrong. But if they've turned on you, if you're alone, please remember this. You are worth more than what they've made you believe. Don't let them bury you before your time. Fight back in whatever way you can. You've always been stronger than me. I cried like a baby. I clutched that letter to my chest and rocked back and forth on that creaky bed. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. The pain and the love of it washed over me like fire. He knew. Even then, he knew. The next morning, I told the girls everything. Ruth was the first to speak. Then we raised hell, she said with a fire in her eyes. Maxine leaned in closer. I know a guy who still has contacts in media. We tell your story. All of it. Doy nodded, her eyes wide with determination. We go public. Elder abuse, financial betrayal. You're not the only one, Ellie. You could help others. And just like that, my quiet escape turned into a mission. We reached out to Jack Winston again, the lawyer who had helped us with the sale of the house. He helped us draft the story and send it off to a journalist friend of his in New York, Megan Luce. Megan ran a syndicated podcast with a large following of older women hungry for truth. Within days, Megan called. She wanted to fly out to meet us. I've been looking for a story like this for years, she said. And while we waited for her to arrive, we traveled Venice, Nice, Lisbon. Everywhere we went, we danced, laughed, and took photos that looked like they belonged in a calendar for fierce grandmothers. And deep down, I knew something was shifting inside of me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. But as I stood on a beach in Portugal, the wind tousling my hair and the surf kissing my ankles, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I picked up, expecting a hotel confirmation. But instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. Grandma. I nearly dropped the phone. It was Emily, my youngest granddaughter. She was crying. I found you, she said. Please don't hang up. My heart stuttered in my chest. Emily, I whispered. I know what they did. Mom and Uncle Luke. I saw the letters. I saw the podcast. I just want to talk to you. Please. And just like that, the ground shifted again. The past wasn't done with me, but neither was the future. I didn't answer her right away. The call ended with a promise. I told Emily I needed time. I wasn't ready. My hand shook so badly that I almost dropped the phone into the Atlantic. Ruth had to take it from me, placing it on the lounge chair while I just stood there, frozen, staring out at the water. She sounded sincere, Ruth said quietly later that evening. We sat on the rooftop terrace of our guest house in Lisbon, the sky stretching above us in shades of honey and blue. The sun was setting on another perfect day, and yet the past had risen up to find me again. This time, with the voice of a child I once rocked to sleep. She's still one of them, Maxine said firm. Don't let a soft voice fool you. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Emily had been different, quiet, observant. She used to follow me around the garden when she was little, pulling weeds and asking questions about birds. I'd save her drawings, her crayon letters. She was the only one who hadn't stopped calling me, until Karen had cut me off from the grandkids altogether. She was 16 now, almost grown, maybe old enough to see things for what they were. Or maybe this was another trick, another setup. 2 days later, I received a text, a photo. It was of my old house, but not the way I remembered it. The porch was stripped bare. The rose bushes were gone. The shutters I'd painted sky blue with George one summer were now a dull beige. Below it, a single message. They trashed it. I'm sorry. I stared at the photo for a long time. My throat clenched like I was being strangled. They hadn't just sold my house. They had gutted it. Erased everything I had built. I showed the picture to the girls. Ruth looked away. Doy's eyes filled with tears. Maxine stared hard at the photo, then flicked her cigarette into the wind. Time to go public, she said, her voice steady. The interview with Megan Luce happened in a quiet cafe overlooking the Douro River. Megan brought her recording equipment in a simple backpack, wearing no makeup. She sat down with a warmth that felt like a hug and said, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her everything. The sacrifice, the long nights working double shifts, the birthdays I made special with nothing but pennies and prayers. I shared the manipulation, the lies, and the betrayal that had seeped into my very bones. I spoke of the night they took me from my home, like I was a piece of furniture that no longer fit. When I finished, Megan took my hand, her eyes filled with understanding. "You are not alone," she said. "You have no idea how many women have shared stories like yours. But yours is going to open eyes." A week later, she aired the podcast. It exploded. Hundreds of thousands of downloads, messages from women all over the country. Survivors of the same betrayal, daughters who regretted their actions, sons who had watched their mothers fade in silence. I didn't set out to be a symbol, but I became one because I had survived. The next day, Karen sent me a message. "How dare you?" Luke called twice. David left a voicemail, slurred with anger and veiled threats. I deleted them all. But then Emily emailed. She told me she had left home and was staying with her aunt on her father's side. "I can't look at my mom anymore without hearing your story in my head," she wrote. She wanted to meet, but not in Texas. "Anywhere else. Please," she said. "I just want to know you again." Maxine warned me. Ruth was hesitant. Doy squeezed my hand and said, "Sometimes healing means opening a door. Just one more time." So I picked the place, Savannah, Georgia. It had always been on my list. A city that smelled of magnolia and ghosts. We flew in the next week. Emily was waiting for me in Forsyth Park, sitting on a bench beneath a moss-draped oak. She stood when she saw me, her eyes wide, tears already brimming. She looked like her mother used to, before Karen turned cold. But there was something else in Emily's face, something raw, something searching. "Hi, Grandma," she said, her voice trembling. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, my voice almost failing me. We walked for hours. She asked questions about George, about my childhood, about the day they took me. She told me she'd found the letters by accident, digging through Karen's filing cabinet while searching for her birth certificate. She confronted them about it, and Karen slapped her. "I couldn't stay after that," she whispered, looking away. I looked at her, this young woman still half a girl, and something inside of me cracked open. I didn't want to carry the weight of anger anymore. I didn't want revenge. What I wanted was restoration. Not for them. For me. I hugged her so tightly. I think I left fingerprints on her soul. When I returned to the girls that night, I told them everything. Ruth wiped away a tear. Doy smiled softly. Maxine said, "Well, damn. Guess there's hope for at least one of them." We spent another week in Savannah. Emily joined us for dinners, walks by the water, and stories under the stars. It was awkward at first, but then it became beautiful, like learning to breathe again after a long time underwater. One night, as we sat together, she turned to me and said, "What if we started something, like a place for women like you, like us?" I didn't answer right away. But the next morning, over coffee and grits, I said, "We're going to build it." I didn't know how, but I had the money. I had the name, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. And I had a granddaughter who was willing to fight with me, instead of against me. The past was a wound, but the future, the future was a fire just waiting to be lit. The Eleanor Grace Foundation began as an idea scribbled on a napkin over pancakes in a diner off River Street. Emily had drawn little stars around the name, her handwriting still loopy and unsure, like a child's. Mine was blocky and firm, unyielding in the ways life had shaped me. We didn't know where to start, but we had a mission to protect women like me. Mothers, grandmothers, widows, women who had been erased, silenced, used, and abandoned by the very people they gave everything to. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. Emily took the reins. She had a sharp mind and a fire in her belly that reminded me of George. She helped register the foundation, built the website, and wrote the copy for the landing page. She contacted senior advocates and legal advisors. She set up a GoFundMe, and it went viral. Hundreds of women wrote in, sharing their stories. Thousands of others donated, sending messages like, "This happened to my mom. Thank you for speaking up." I thought I was alone. We started small. A pilot program in Savannah. A free legal clinic once a week. Resource packets mailed to women in nursing homes. Support groups run on Zoom. Seeing my name on the homepage felt surreal, like a version of me I once knew, but hadn't fully met until now. Meanwhile, the media wouldn't stop calling. Newsweek, CNN, NPR. They all wanted my story, but I turned most of them down. I wasn't a spectacle. I wasn't a trend. I was a woman who'd survived and built something from the ashes. I didn't want attention. I wanted impact. But one interview I agreed to was with a local Savannah station. The reporter, a woman my age named Lorraine, asked gently at the end, "If you could say one thing to the people who put you in that nursing home, what would it be?" I looked at the camera. My voice didn't shake. "I forgive you, but I'll never forget who I became because of you." That clip went everywhere. Karen saw it. She left me a voicemail after 6 months of silence. I never listened to it. I didn't need to. Whatever she had to say, she'd had decades to say it before. The chapter was closed. Luke tried to sue me, claiming I'd stolen the house out from under them. The judge dismissed the case in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even show up in person. Maxine did, and from what I heard, she destroyed him in her closing statement. David moved out of state. I haven't heard from him since. Fine by me. And Emily, she became my shadow and my star. She traveled with me when we opened our first foundation home in upstate New York. A cozy 5-bedroom house where women could live safely after being displaced by family abuse or neglect. We named the home Grace House. When we cut the ribbon, I cried so hard my knees buckled. Ruth had to hold me up. Speaking of Ruth, she met someone. Yes, that Ruth. It happened on a cruise ship we all took to Alaska the following spring. His name was Dennis, widower, bad dancer, great with chocolate martinis. She said he made her laugh like nobody else ever had. They now spend half the year in Florida, arguing over shuffleboard and pretending not to be madly in love. Doy started a poetry blog that somehow gained hundreds of followers. She writes about grief and healing, and every entry ends with a little line, "Just for me," and still Eleanor rises. Maxine, oh Maxine, she's our legal director now. She runs her mouth in court like she was born in a courtroom. She wears red lipstick every day and claims it's armor. And me, I'm still traveling, still telling the story, still fighting. The last thing I did before we closed the year was visit my old house. Not to confront them, not to mourn, just to see. It had been repainted. The porch had been redone. New owners, a young couple with a baby swing out front. I stood across the street, unnoticed, just an old woman in sunglasses and a scarf. I smiled. That house wasn't my home anymore. Home was wherever I stood in my truth. It was where women gathered to lift each other up, where Eleanor Grace Miller refused to be forgotten. As I walked away, a breeze swept through the street, carrying the sweet scent of roses from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost feel George's hand in mine. "We did it," I whispered. "We made it." In that still, sacred moment, I knew that this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The cruise ship was like a floating palace, gleaming white against the sapphire water with the golden letters spelling out celestial dawn across the side. We boarded in Seattle, under a canopy of cherry blossoms, their petals drifting in the breeze like a blessing. The air smelled of salt and fresh starts. It was our reward, our celebration. One last promise fulfilled before the next chapter unfolded. I stood on the upper deck with Ruth, die, and Maxine as the ship pulled away from the shore. Emily was below, finishing a virtual meeting for the foundation. She was leading a grant proposal to open 3 more homes in the Midwest. She had grown into this fierce, radiant version of herself, and I thank God every day that she had found her way back to me and to herself. "Can you believe we're doing this?" Joy asked, her hair wrapped in a floral scarf that fluttered in the wind. "We should have done this 30 years ago," Ruth said, sipping champagne and laughing. "But hey, late is better than never." Maxine pointed toward the horizon. "Look at that sky. I want to paint it with a martini in my hand." We all laughed. It was the kind of laughter that felt like air filling your lungs after nearly drowning. That night, we dressed in our best and had dinner in the ship's ballroom. The lighting was soft, warm, like candlelight. The chairs were plush velvet, the silverware heavier than necessary, and the waiters smiled as if they were in on some grand, elegant joke. Halfway through dessert, molten chocolate cake with raspberry drizzle, the band began to play. Not loud, not showy, just the soft strains of an old Ella Fitzgerald tune. And something stirred inside me. I stood up. "I want to dance," I said. "For the first time in years, I want to dance." Maxine raised her eyebrows. Ruth beamed. Joy clapped softly, already reaching for her camera. There was no one to dance with. No partner waiting on the other side of the ballroom. Just me, in a navy dress I'd bought on a whim in Florence, with shoes that pinched and a heart that was too full. But I walked out there anyway. The band watched me. The other passengers looked up. I closed my eyes and danced. I swayed slowly, gracefully, to the music that wrapped around me like a memory. I danced for every night I cried alone, for every holiday my children forgot, for every woman who sat in a sterile room, wondering if her life had already ended. I danced for George, for Emily, and for myself. At some point, I felt arms around me. Someone had stepped onto the floor. Strong, steady hands guided mine. I opened my eyes to see Dennis, Ruth's gentleman friend, smiling gently. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. More people joined us. Older couples, solo dancers, a small sea of strangers moving together under the chandelier light. We danced, not like we were young again, but like we had finally remembered who we were. The music slowed. The final note lingered. And then the applause came. Not wild, not showy, just warm, deep and true. Back at the table, Emily had joined the girls. She stood and opened her arms as I walked toward her. "You looked like you were flying," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I was," I said. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dancing for anyone else. Later that night, we stood on the balcony outside our shared suite. The sea stretched endlessly before us, moonlight sparkling on the water. The northern lights began to appear, green and violet waves undulating in the dark sky. We watched in silence for a long time. "Do you ever miss them?" Emily asked softly. "My children." I nodded. I took a deep breath. "I miss who I thought they were. I miss the hope, but not the pain." She nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry they hurt you." I kissed the top of her head. "You didn't. And you're helping fix what they broke." That's more than I ever dreamed. The sky danced above us. The water whispered of new beginnings. And I stood there, not as a victim, not even as a survivor. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, grandmother, founder, fighter. And in that moment, I knew I had finally come home. Not to a place, but to myself. We reached Juneau just as the sun began to set behind the icy peaks, casting a golden light across the ship's bow. The harbor was quiet, gentle waves lapping against the dock as we stepped onto solid ground, bundled in layers, our breath curling in the cold Alaskan air. The others decided to explore the local shops and try some crab legs. Emily and I, however, chose a different path. We booked a small helicopter tour, something we'd never done before. Neither of us had the stomach for heights, but that was the point. "I want to see the world from the top," I told her. For once, the pilot, a woman named Sam with a gravelly voice and the calm of someone who's seen storms up close, helped us into our seats. Emily gripped my hand tightly as the rotors began to spin. I grinned like a fool as we lifted into the sky. The world below us began to shrink. Juneau became a miniature town in a snow globe. The mountains unfolded, vast, white, and wild. Glaciers cracked and shimmered like rivers of ancient glass. We hovered over one of the largest glaciers, and the sun broke through the clouds, turning the ice into something almost holy. I'd never seen anything so vast, so untouched. It made me feel small, but not in a bad way. More like in a beautiful, awe-filled way, as if everything I'd endured was merely a prelude to this moment. "I'm glad you didn't give up," Emily said softly over the headset. I turned to her, tears stinging my eyes. "I almost did, but then you called." She squeezed my hand. "I think you saved me too." We landed on a flat stretch of ice, wrapped in thermal blankets as we stepped out into the crisp air. It was just us and the silence of snow, the kind that hushes everything: pain, memory, fear. I took out the last letter George had written, the one I'd carried with me all this time, and I let it go. I watched it drift across the ice, carried by the wind, weightless. It fluttered, spun, and disappeared into the white. It was time to stop carrying the weight. Later that night, we returned to the ship and found the others waiting with champagne. To Eleanor, Ruth toasted, holding her glass high. "The fiercest damn woman I've ever met." To Grace, said Di, "in every form she comes in." To second chances, Maxine added, winking. And Emily leaned in, clinking her glass gently to mine. To beginnings. We drank under the stars, wrapped in blankets and love. Laughter echoed across the deck, carried by the sea. And when I closed my eyes that night, I dreamed not of the past, but of all the mornings still ahead. Not as a mother forgotten, not as a woman discarded, but as Eleanor Grace Miller, reborn, redeemed, and finally irrevocably free. The final morning of the cruise arrived, wrapped in fog and a quiet stillness, the kind that makes you feel like the world is pausing just long enough for you to say goodbye. I stood at the rail of the ship, coffee in hand, watching the coastline of Alaska slip further behind us. I thought I would feel sad, but I didn't. Instead, I felt full. Emily joined me, still in her pajamas and a wool scarf wrapped haphazardly around her neck. "Today feels different," she said. "It is," I replied. "It's the last day of running." She looked at me, confused. "Running from what?" I turned to face her fully. From grief, from guilt, from everything I thought I failed to be. Her eyes softened. "You didn't fail, Grandma." "They did." I smiled gently. "Maybe, but I don't want my life to be defined by what others did to me. I want it to be defined by what I chose to do anyway." After breakfast, we held a small ceremony, just the 5 of us. We gathered in the private lounge, away from the crowds. There was no stage, no speeches, just stories. We took turns sharing the names of women we'd known who had been lost to silence, discarded or forgotten. Ruth spoke of her sister. Doy read a poem she'd written the night before. Maxine lit 5 candles, one for each of us, and one for every woman we'd met on our journey who never got to live hers freely. And I told the story of my life. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the parts one had rediscovered. Planting tomatoes with George, rocking babies on the porch, dancing barefoot in the kitchen to old Motown records. I told them about my first kiss behind the bleachers. The time I hitchhiked across the state line with my best friend at 17. The Christmas I surprised the kids with a puppy named Comet. I told them about the fire inside me and how, for years, I let others pour water on it. But here's the thing about fire, I said, my voice steady. If you protect the spark long enough, it will burn again. We each took our candle and set it afloat in a glass bowl, watching the flames drift and flicker on the water's surface. I looked around at the women who saved me, who reminded me who I was, and at Emily, my legacy and my future. "I'm going home," I said softly. Her heads turned toward me. "I'm not going back to Texas," I clarified, "but I'm building something permanent, a real place, a headquarters for the foundation, a retreat, a home for any woman who needs one." Maxine grinned. "Where?" I took a breath. "Where it all began. Savannah." They all nodded. It made sense. It always had. 6 months later, Grace Haven opened its doors. It was a white two-story house with green shutters and a wide porch that wrapped around like arms ready to embrace. We built it with donations, love, and the sheer determination of women who had refused to be erased. Emily became the executive director. Ruth and Dennis hosted monthly supper clubs. Doy ran writing workshops. Maxine gave legal consultations pro bono every Friday. And me, I sat on that porch every morning with a cup of coffee, watching the world come to us. Women arrived with trembling hands and broken stories, leaving with light in their eyes. Sometimes I told my story. Other times, I just listened because I had learned something powerful. Sometimes the greatest redemption isn't just surviving what they did to you. It's choosing to become someone they never saw coming. Someone stronger, someone free, someone unforgettable. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller, and this is my legacy. Not in buildings, not in money, but in the fire I passed on and the women who now carry it forward. It was our first Thanksgiving at Grace Haven. The sun poured through the tall windows, casting golden light across the wood floors. The air was thick with the warmth of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cornbread. Outside, the leaves had just begun to fall in Savannah, painting the lawn in rich reds and oranges that crunched under every footstep. On the porch, wind chimes whispered memories into the breeze. Inside, there was laughter, the kind that came from deep in the belly, not from politeness. The long dining table, donated by a woman who had once been told by her husband she wasn't fit to host, was now covered in mismatched plates and silverware, with candles flickering between serving bowls. Around it sat 22 women. Some wore pearls, others wore jeans, but all of them wore hope on their faces. Grace Haven had been open for just 3 months. 3 months. And already we had changed lives. There was Olivia, who had escaped a marriage that had kept her silent for 35 years. There was Harriet, left homeless after her adult son drained her savings and disappeared. There was Rosa, who at 71 finally learned to read, leaving sticky notes around the house with words she loved, like light and soft beginning. I sat at the head of the table, not because I asked to, but because the others insisted. They said I was the reason they were there. But as I looked around, I knew the truth. They were the reason I was whole again. I stood to give a toast, not a speech, just a few words. I raised my glass, apple cider with a splash of bourbon, just how George used to make it. This year, I began. I didn't lose everything. The room fell still. I found everything I was missing. I looked around at Ruth and Dennis, seated side by side with their hands intertwined. At Maxine, carving the turkey like she was presiding over a courtroom. At Doy, passing out her homemade apple pie and handing napkins to a girl with tears in her eyes. And at Emily, my granddaughter, the fiercest, kindest soul I'd ever known, standing behind me like a lighthouse. I found myself, I said, my voice trembling. I found family not by blood, but by choice. I found purpose in the ashes of pain. And I want you all to know, this isn't just a home for the broken. It's a home for the rising. The room erupted in clinks of glasses, soft weeping, and applause that felt like music made just for us. Later, as the sun dipped low and the candles flickered, I walked out to the porch. Emily joined me, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. You never told me what you wish for, she said, nudging my shoulder. What do you mean? I asked. That night in Alaska, she said, when you let George's letter go. What did you wish for when you released it? I smiled. I wished, I said, that someday someone would know me for who I really was. And now, I wish that someone else will see their own worth before it's too late. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. You're changing the world, Grandma. No, baby, I whispered. We are. And we sat there, 2 generations of fire, watching the stars appear one by one, like tiny promises written across the sky. Winter came softly to Savannah. Unlike the sharp cold I remembered from Texas winters, here it arrived like a gentle hush. Crisp mornings, the scent of pine and clove in the air, soft blankets, and slower walks under gray skies. Grace Haven glowed with string lights and quiet miracles. Each room now held a story. One belonged to Clara, who arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a photograph of her late husband. Her children had emptied her bank account and left her in a motel 2 towns over. At first, she didn't speak much, but after a few weeks in our garden, her hands found their way back to the earth and to her voice. Another story belonged to Naomi, a former nurse who had been placed in assisted living against her will. Now, she taught yoga in the mornings, sitting in a chair, leading breathing exercises for women whose hearts were still learning how to trust again. Every time a new woman arrived at Grace Haven, I saw myself in her. A reflection of who I once was, sitting in that beige nursing home, suitcase by my feet, faith slipping from my fingers. And with every new arrival, I grew stronger. In January, we held a special gathering, the first night of names. It was Doy's idea and it was beautiful. We each stood in a circle, holding a small candle, and said the name of a woman we wanted to honor. A mother, a friend, or a version of ourselves we'd left behind. When it was my turn, I said simply, Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed too quiet for too long. And I let the silence stretch, not out of grief, but out of respect. That woman, that version of me, deserved to be remembered too. She kept going when no one thanked her. She loved, even when it hurt. And, finally, she stood up when it mattered most. After the ceremony, Emily found me in the kitchen, tears drying on her cheeks. I want to write a book, she said. About you? About all of this. I laughed. You think people would want to read about a grandma who sold her house out from under her kids and ran off to Italy with a pack of retired rebels? Yes, she said, dead serious. Because they're out there, Grandma. All the women who feel stuck, who think it's too late, who think they're too old to change anything. I want them to know it's never too late. That night, I started jotting down notes in a spiral notebook. Memories, lessons, truths that no one teaches you until it's nearly too late. I didn't know if it would become a book, a blog, or just a box of letters for the next generation. But I knew one thing. My voice wasn't going quiet again. February brought unexpected news. The foundation had been nominated for a national award, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant, given to initiatives that empowered older women with dignity, autonomy, and voice. Maxine read the email aloud in the common room. Ruth screamed. Doy cried. Emily danced me around the coffee table. A week later, the local news team returned to film a segment. This time, they didn't just interview me. They interviewed all of us, the women of Grace Haven. Each one shared her story, and the camera captured something no words could fully hold. Their power. When the segment aired, we received over 3,000 emails in 48 hours. 3,000 women asking for help. Daughters trying to help their mothers. Grandmothers asking if there was a Grace Haven near them. We were overwhelmed. And then we were determined. We began to expand. Another home opened in Asheville, another in Michigan, and a third was planned for Oregon in the fall. Through it all, I kept my morning ritual. Coffee on the porch, a notebook in my lap, a quiet prayer on my lips. Not for justice anymore, but for joy. The life I never thought I'd get to live. And every so often, I'd see a woman walk up our path for the first time, her shoulders hunched, her eyes guarded. And I'd rise to meet her. I'd take her hand and whisper just loud enough for her heart to hear, "You're not lost. You're just getting started." Spring bloomed early that year, as if even the trees and flowers had grown impatient for more life. Grace Haven was covered in blossoms, wisteria curling around the porch railings, daffodils bursting from the garden like little trumpets of hope. Everything smelled fresh, alive, like the world itself had turned a page. And I, Eleanor Grace Miller, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Emily's book idea had taken root. We called it Not Done Yet. She had taken my stories, my letters, and the experiences of the women I'd met along the way, weaving them into something more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just my memoir. It was a testament, a declaration. We launched it with a garden party right here at Grace Haven, inviting every woman who had ever passed through our doors and their families. Yes, even some of the children who had once been the reason they came to us in the first place. People do change. Not all of them, but some. Enough to restore a little faith in this world. Karen didn't come. David didn't write. Luke sent a bitter message through a lawyer, claiming the book defamed him. We didn't respond, but Emily's parents, her father and stepmother, came and they brought flowers. "Thank you," her father said to me, his voice soft but full of sincerity, for giving her back to us stronger. That night, after the guests had left, after the lights were taken down and the cake plates were stacked in the sink, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same mug, same stars above. And for the first time in a long while, I finally allowed myself to remember everything. Not just the pain, but the love, too. George, the babies I had held, the home I once had, the silence I endured, the fight I found, the legacy I'd built with bare, battered hands. Maxine joined me, a blanket over her lap. Ruth and Dennis waved goodnight from their little cottage across the garden. Doy was already inside, working on a new poem about reclaiming your bloom. Maxine nudged my arm. "You did it, you know." "Did what?" I asked. "You rewrote the ending." I looked at her, her eyes soft with the kind of peace that comes only after the storm. "No," I whispered. "I just started telling the truth." She chuckled, that gravelly, no-nonsense laugh that had carried us through the worst of it. And in that moment, I felt it. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be chosen, not to be heard, not to be seen. I was here fully. And for every woman who had ever felt small, who had ever been pushed aside, silenced, or forgotten, I left these words carved, not in stone, but in the hearts of everyone we touched. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done yet, and neither was I. The day the award letter arrived, I was making lemon bars in the kitchen with Emily. The sunlight poured through the windows, warm and syrupy, catching the dust from the flowers in the air. We were laughing, laughing about something ridiculous Ruth had said the day before. The way her dentures had flown halfway across the table during a heated game of Scrabble. And then the mail came. It wasn't fancy, just a cream-colored envelope with our names typed neatly on the front. Eleanor G. Miller and Emily Grace Weston, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. Emily opened it first. Her hands trembled halfway through, and she passed it to me without a word. I took it, heart slow and heavy, and read, "Congratulations. You have been awarded the Women of Strength Legacy Grant in recognition of your tireless work empowering women and restoring dignity to those too long forgotten. We honor you with a lifetime endowment to continue and expand your mission." I sank into the nearest chair. Not because of the money, though Lord knows it would help us build 3 more Grace Havens by the end of the year, but because of the words, "We honor you." No one had ever said that to me before. Emily knelt beside me, her face glowing. "You did this," she said. "You made this world." "No," I whispered. "We made it together." We held a celebration the following weekend, not just for the grant, but for the lives we had helped repair. Over 100 women gathered in the garden, some in wheelchairs, others with walkers, some with silver braids and lipstick, and all with stories written in the lines around their eyes. There were hugs, reunions, off-key songs, and speeches given through tears. They crowned me with a flower wreath Ruth had made herself. A silly thing, really, daisies and ivy. But I wore it like a queen, because for the first time, I understood what royalty truly meant. It wasn't about ruling. It was about rising. That night, after the last lantern had been dimmed and the guests had gone to sleep, I sat alone in my room. The award certificate rested on the table beside me, along with George's last letter, the copy I'd printed and framed. It sat next to a photo of us on our wedding day, young and bright-eyed, completely unaware of the world to come. For the first time in my life, I spoke to him out loud. "I did it, George. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew." My voice cracked, but I wasn't alone. A soft knock on the door interrupted me. Emily peeked in. "Sorry," she said. "Just wanted to say goodnight." "Come sit," I said, patting the bed beside me. She curled up next to me like she did when she was little, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," I told her. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You turned ashes into light." We sat there in silence, no need for more words. The quiet between us was full of everything sacred. When she finally left, I stood by the window looking out over the garden, where so many had healed, where I had healed. And I realized something. This wasn't just a second chance at life. It was life, the one I had always deserved. With the moon glowing above and spring thick in the air, I closed my eyes and smiled. I had finally come home. Not to a house, but to myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters,